Good afternoon. I'm Cynthia Runge, and I'm the manager of Peridot Family Law in Boston, Massachusetts. I am the owner of a full-service family law firm. We focus on family law matters, divorce, custody, mediation, collaborative law. And today I am thrilled to be able to introduce to you Lovern Gordon, who is the president of Love Life Now. When I first started publicizing this interview, this process, it's like Lovern is a celebrity. So
Oh,
many people reached out and said, "Oh, that's so exciting. You're going to be interviewing her, and she's just great." And I said, "I know. That's why I'm just thrilled that she's here." Um, Folks, I just want to remind you that we are recording this. It's just when it is recorded, it's going to be Lovern and me that's going to be visible and her PowerPoint. But if you have any concerns about your personal identity, in the participant chat then you need to either rename yourself or, make the decision that you don't want to be present. But we just want to remind you, I think most people are pretty familiar with how Zoom works by this time. But without further ado, I want to introduce to you Lovern Gordon. And just as we wrote in our newsletter and when we were publicizing this event, that Lovern is a two-time, she calls herself sur-THRIVER of domestic violence. She was a child witness until she was 15 years old in Trinidad, as well as a 2-year young adult relationship in the United States. 10 years after escaping the adult relationship, she became the founder of Love Life Now, LLN, where she used 2 back-to-back pageant wins to increase awareness around domestic violence in 2010. In the following year, LLN was formed. Today, Lovern continues to head Love Life Now, a global awareness and education organization that supports survivors of abuse through their year-round initiatives and direct assistance to other domestic violence programs. Today, Lovern is going to talk about a lot of things, but she's going to explain what is domestic violence, what are the signs of someone who's dealing with it, becoming acquainted with the concepts of DV, why victims stay, and how to support someone going through abuse and what resources are available. Lovern, take it from here.
Cynthia, thank you so much. I appreciate the intro. Was bowing my head a little bit humbly. So I very much appreciate you. I'm going to jump right into it in the essence of time and share my screen and get this going. All right. So today we're going to be talking about understanding domestic violence and the issue of why I stayed, which is what the presentation is sometimes called. And it's going to be presented by myself, again, the president of Love Life Now Foundation. And I'd like to take a little bit, just a very quick bit to talk about who we are. LLN, as we are also known, is a domestic violence awareness agency, and we eat, sleep, and breathe the issue of domestic violence awareness. We want people to be in the know about what this issue entails, and not just when they get to a police station or a hospital, but really beforehand so that people understand really what this issue is, looking out for red flags, being able to support others, as Cynthia said. And who are we? Well, we're a board of many mixed personalities and races, and this is us. The 4 in the middle are folks that have been with us for the past maybe 6 years. The hands of our logo is that gentleman that is standing next to me. He is a founding board member, Antonio, and has been with us since the inception. And the 4 others that are on the outskirts of us are recent board members that we just enrolled as of last year. And we have all not been in the same place to date. So we are going to get ourselves together at some point and get a full group picture. Well, what do we do? So again, we promote awareness around the issue of domestic violence. And one of the ways that we do that is through the initiatives that we host in the community. We get people out and about talking about this issue in person and virtually. At the top, you see me talking there as I am to you now. During COVID, we had no borders as to where we were able to speak. And that's me speaking in Saudi Arabia around the issue of domestic violence. We then host a bedding drive in the fall during Domestic Violence Awareness Month, where we ask folks to donate a new twin sheet and or pillow. And those items go back to a domestic violence shelter so that they can give it to the residents that are housed there. Because oftentimes people are fleeing with just the clothes on their backs. And a new sheet and pillow means the world to them. It is personal and it is theirs. We also have a resource called the Get Safe Fund, where we help folks with a domestic violence related expense if they have just recently left a domestic violence situation or are thinking about leaving. That can be emergency hotel for up to 3 nights. It can be a transportation issue. It can be a flight. It can be clothes, food, whatever have you. We have a one-time mini grant that we offer to help folks with that, with those cost. Then we have our White Ribbon Night Gala that asks more men to speak out against the issue. Too often you hear us as men, you hear us as women, like myself, advocating for this cause. But when men are talking to other men about why it's important for them to use their voice, it resonates differently. Our Heal-a-thon is the next block, where we ask folks to put on a comfy pair of heels. Heels are not mandatory, but they walk a mile in support of awareness, raising awareness in June. That walk is coming up on June 3rd this year. It is our 12th annual walk. And men and women join us. We also have men walking in heels, not a whole ton, but the ones that do, they brave that mile in those heels and have a great time. And then our homeless brown bag and care. Throughout the year, once per quarter, we have a drive that we meet the homeless where they're at to give a brown bag lunch and a care package filled with toiletries so that we use those things as incentives for victims on the streets to come and speak to us about the abuse they're facing. And then in turn, we offer resources. That's just a snippet of the awareness events that we put on throughout this year. I can go on and on, but wanted to give you sort of an insight. So today we're talking about domestic violence. And what is domestic violence? Oftentimes when people hear that term, they think only about the physical, and that is certainly not the case. Domestic violence, or DV, which I'll often call it throughout the presentation, or intimate partner violence, IPV is what you also hear oftentimes, is the willful. And I underline willful because it is something that someone intended to do. It's the willful intimidation, because it isn't something that you said, oops, I tripped and I hit you, or I minced my words, or I didn't mince my words and I came off that way to you. It is a choice. It's the willful intimidation, physical assault, sexual assault, and or other abusive behavior as part of a systematic pattern. Another word that I underline, because once someone does or perpetrates this towards another, it is because that it's part of a pattern. It isn't because it happened once and it won't happen again, regardless of what they say to you. It is a systematic pattern of power and control, which is what this issue circumvents, right? Power and control over someone else, perpetrated by one intimate partner against another, not just boyfriends. It can include physical violence, sexual violence, psychological violence, and emotional abuse. So I'm going to stick here for a little bit because I want to touch on a little bit about my story and why this issue is so important to me. And I'm going to stick on the power and control wheel because it really does a good job of breaking down what some of the issues are around domestic violence and how they show up in relationships. And so I come to this issue as a two-time sur-THRIVER, as Cindy mentioned, not just surviving, but thriving now after what happened to me. But as a child witness, I witnessed our father brutally abusing our mother for many years, and kept saying that that would never be me. I would never let anybody treat me the way our father treated our mother. He would berate her, he would belittle her, he would verbally accost her, and he would physically and brutally beat her. And this is something that myself and my 4 other siblings witnessed almost on a daily basis. We often would live in fear at the fact that at any given point he would either enact child abuse against our older siblings, which are two older siblings. I had four siblings, as I mentioned, and one that was 2 years younger than me. My older siblings, boy and girl, were about 7 years apart from us. And so we watched them get the brunt of the child abuse in terms and what he called discipline for many years as well, but nothing compared to what he unleashed against our mother. And so for those years that he brutally abused her, and I want to, before I go any further, I want to say that please self-care during the presentation. If you need to step away, if you need to mute me, please do, because a lot of what I say can be triggering for those that are survivors or victims listening to this. And so watching our father brutally abuse our mother was something that left me scared. It left me angry. It left me voiceless. Oftentimes, my father would refer to me as the golden child, the girl or the one that was going to sort of do something with her life. And he had so much high hopes for me. Unfortunately, children that grow up in abusive homes tend to go on to become victims of abuse or abusers themselves. And I was no exception. So for all the many hopes that my father had for me, the legacy that he passed down to me was that of the behaviors that he perpetrated against our mother, which was his attitude around what he thought love was, what he thought respect was. And again, I was no exception. So growing up, kept saying that would never be me. Unfortunately, after I migrated to the States, my father allowed me to come to the States to finish high school. Out of my siblings and my mom and dad, they stayed behind. And I came to live with my grandparents here in the States. And once I finished high school, I met someone while I was working an entry-level job in corporate America and going to Suffolk University at nights. And for all intent purposes, I thought I had it all together. I thought I was on my way to becoming really, in part, more like him. Because even though I took traits of those behaviors subconsciously of the things that he did to our mother, I also saw him in a respectable light. So on the outskirts, on the outside of the house, he would present charming, and he was articulate, and he was, well mannered and well read and well spoken. And I wanted to be all of those things. Again, unfortunately, children that witness abuse tend to go on to perpetrate themselves in one form or another. And I became a victim. So I met this gentleman, and he really reminded me of my father. He was well spoken, he was articulate, he was well rounded. And for 3 months, we started dating, and things I thought were going great until the first day that he slapped me because he didn't hear from me. He kept calling me that particular morning. I was sick and didn't go into the office that particular time. And so because of that, I stayed home and thought that I would, speak to him at some point during the day, because we would talk at least, or I should say he would call me at least 5 to 6 times before I even got to the office. Unbeknownst to me, he was calling me that many times because he wanted to see where I was at any given point. He wanted to keep track of me. He wanted to make sure that I said where I was going to be. And so missing that very big red flag, I took it as flattery. And so that particular morning when he came over, because I finally answered the phone, and he barged in very irate and very jealous minded, trying to figure out who I had been with that morning. Had I brought somebody over that I did, which is why I didn't call him that morning. And so all the accusation hurled at me. And he essentially said that I was cheating on him. And then he slapped me so hard that I saw stars. That left me crying. That left me confused. That left me trying to figure out what did I do to make him think that. And after a while, I caught myself and said, no, I didn't do anything. I told the truth, which is that I was sick and that, I thought that we would talk at some point during the day. And so he barged out and left. And, maybe about a week or so later, he came by while I was not at home. And my brother and my younger siblings, who are now my mom and my younger siblings, who are now living with my grandparents and myself, we're living in the same house. And my brother met me outside and he said, "Oh, such and such has been by here looking for you." And he dropped something off for you. And he said, when I went into the room, he said he left 2 dozen purple roses, and I saw it, and I immediately became enamored because I said to myself, my gosh, is he trying to apologize? When I turned on my cell phone, there was a barrage of endearing messages saying how apologetic he was, and that if I could just call him back, that, everything would be explained. And so I gave him that chance. I answered the call, or the voicemails, and I called him back, and his voice sounded very remorseful. And he stated that he was sorry, in multiple ways, and that it would never happen again. Right. And I took that and I ran with it because I said to myself, you know what? He apologized, and he went to such great lengths to apologize. Purple was my favorite color. So the idea of purple roses was a big deal to me, right? And the idea of this apology and the multiple apologies that he delivered via voicemail was proof to me that he meant what he was saying. And so I, took him back, and that then turned into almost 2 years of physical, verbal, and emotional abuse until the last night that he beat me. And so at this point, I am now living on my own, living in a studio apartment, where he would visit very frequently, and he would come over, sleep most nights, not sleep some nights, but stay most of the day. This particular day, he came into the apartment and he was completely irate. And because of his body language, I could tell that something was going to happen. I could tell that he essentially wanted to unleash on me. I had become so accustomed to what his mood was. I was always looking on alert for, what was he thinking? What was he going to think about my action? Was he going to, be upset that I talked to this person or didn't talk to this person? I was always on alert for what was his deal, right? And so this particular night he walked in, and I said to myself, as soon as he did, how long is this attack going to last? Because I just knew it would lead to that, right? Whatever it was, it would lead to that. And it sure did. So he came in and started accusing me that, who had I been talking to that particular day, checked my cell phone, went through the call logs, sort of rummaging through my stuff, just looking for any excuse to start an argument. And so he came upon a stack of books. And these books that had moved with me for many years, he started doing, one of these, sort of flipping through the pages of each book. And one particular book he came across, popped out a picture. And this picture fell on the floor, and he picked it up, and then he looked at it and he stared at me on my daybed. When I was sitting on my daybed, which was in this long studio apartment. And he looked at the picture, and then he flung it at me, and then he stormed into the kitchen. And when I looked at the picture, I almost died inside because I knew what he was thinking. This picture was myself and someone that I had dated briefly in Trinidad. It was a picture of both of us sitting on the beach, looking very happy, hugged up in each other's arms. And that relationship died almost as soon as it started because I moved to the States and it was no more. And I tried to explain this to him, and it was to no avail. He came back from the kitchen with a long knife and said to me that I'm going to kill you. He said, "You've been making a fool of me this entire time." And as he's saying this, I'm saying to myself, okay, this is how I'm going to die. Nobody's going to find me. You know, for all the times that I said that this would never be me, subconsciously after that first slap, I just thought, this is what relationships were supposed to be. I thought that, at some point that he would change. I thought that he was telling the truth, that when he said, you know, this would never happen again, but it did. And each time I kept saying to myself things would change, that I could cry enough, or he would see how much he was hurting me, whether he was grabbing my arm, you know, pulling my hair, strangling me, punching me. You know, each time these things happen, you know, the apologies would come. And I kept saying that at some point it would change, because he said as much. And this particular night, once he had that knife, I knew that that was not going to be the case, because this was the first time that he had ever grabbed a physical weapon. Every other time he had used his hands, his words, or his, even sometimes his legs. So I really thought that that was the end. He straddled me on the daybed and put the knife up against my throat to let me know that he could slit it at any time. He started cursing at me. He was spitting in my face. Um, he was light skinned in color. So this was the first time that I'd ever seen him turn beet red. And the level of anger in his face was something that I had never seen before. That attack, that consisted of him punching me about the body, strangling me, slapping me in the face, putting the knife up against my neck, threatening me to, again, press as hard as he possibly could without uh, mincing blood. It started from about 9 o'clock the night before and went till about 2 o'clock the next morning. Stop, go, where he would get up and pace the floor, come back over me, you know, straddle me again, come back, pace the floor. And then once he was done at about 2 o'clock, he just laid in my day bed like nothing had happened and fell asleep. Until about 2 o'clock the next morning. I'm sorry, about 4 o'clock the next morning, a couple hours, because what did I do? I laid down next to him. The mindset was at about, you know, once he was done, where was I going to go? Who was I going to call? At that point, I was so isolated from family and friends, because I had this mindset of it was me and him against the world. When I did, you know, somewhat disclose that all things weren't great between him and I at one point, my brothers yelled, "Why are you with him?" My mom said, "You should be done with him." And what they didn't understand was that the apologies that were coming was enough for me at the time. And their mindsets of him was done and dealt with from that very one time. So it was to the point where I said they didn't understand our relationship, so I'm not going to share anymore. And I kept what was happening to me to myself. Unfortunately, that was to my detriment, not understanding that they would really wanted the best for me. That being said, I laid down next to him that particular morning, and I whimpered myself to be as quiet as I could, because as much as I was hurting physically, I didn't want the neighbors to hear. I lived in the studio and an apartment in a building with a bunch of other professionals, and I didn't want anybody thinking less of me. At that point, I still didn't see myself as a victim. I thought that I was still better than what my mother had went through. I'm getting hit, but it's not as bad as what she went through. She would get hit with machetes. He would beat her in front of our house outside in the public. She ended up in the hospital a lot of the times. Um, I was nothing like that. My mother was uneducated at the time. She barely had an elementary school education. She was not as worldly as my father. And I thought, you know, I'm different. I'm on my way to getting a college education. Um, I'm working a job. I'm respected in my community. And, you know, this is nothing like what she's going through. So it is so far separate. The only thing that's the same is what is transpiring in the relationship in terms of the physical abuse. And I'm saying to myself, it's still not as bad. So I kept myself as quiet as I could. One, to not wake him up so that he could be irate again. And two, for my neighbors not to hear. Until about 4 o'clock that morning, I turned over with the sharpest pain that I had had, from any of these attacks. And I said to myself, okay, Lovern, you have to choose yourself or stay here for another attack potentially, or for him to kill you. I chose myself for the very first time in almost 2 years. I decided to get up as quietly as I could with every fear bone in my body, get dressed quietly, and I limped downstairs. And I lived at the corner of Ashmont um, Street and Dorchester Ave, which is next to the Ashmont train station. I got in a cab. There were always cabs downstairs. I got a cab and I asked the driver to take me to Kearney Hospital. When I got to the first light, there were only two lights between my building and the hospital. When I got to the first light, my abuser realized that I was gone, and he got up and followed me in his car. He pulled up next to the cab at the red light and started yelling for me to get out. I begged the driver to run the red light if he had to, because if he let me out of the cab, I was as good as dead. And he listened to me and ran the red light. And the next light, my abuser realized that I was pulling into the hospital and sped away. I didn't understand in that moment that my voice was as powerful as his blows. Okay. I didn't understand that he sped away because he, for the first time, thought that I was going to say something to somebody about what had happened. All right. I didn't understand that. Instead, I walked into the ER with a load of shame. I lied and I said to the ER nurses that that I fell in the shower and that I had hurt certain places about my body. And they ran x-rays conducive to that. When the ER doctor came into the room, the first thing he said was that these injuries aren't consistent with you falling in the shower. Who did this to you? And that was daunting. That question was the most daunting thing that I had ever heard, because that question meant that potentially he would tell the police would then potentially, get a hold of my mom. My siblings would know exactly what was now happening to me. My school would potentially find out why I was on my way to flunk in my first year of college. My job would potentially fire me. And Cindy, I want to be cognizant of time, so if you can give me a 5-minute warning so we have time for Q&A, that would be amazing.
Sure.
So, essentially, I did fess up and tell him what had happened to me, but I begged him not to call police. And that then led me to the next leg of what leaving potentially looks like for many survivors. Was that even though I refused the help of, what that could have potentially been, I then didn't understand that leaving was the most dangerous time for me and many other victims. And I, again, no exception. Went home, tried to break into my apartment 2 weeks later after I finally verbally said to him that I was through. That sent him into a spiral. Tried to break into my apartment, cut the phone lines in my basement, used a crowbar to get in between the locks because I had had them changed. When I finally called police during that said potential break-in, he left and fled away, but then showed up, maybe about a week later and decided to start stalking me because he knew now that I would physically call someone. He then started to sort of show up in places where he knew I would be, leaving derogatory notes on the car that I was using at the time. It was another couple of weeks of hell. And that's when I finally filed a restraining order. But many victims do not get that chance. Oftentimes you hear on the news that she was getting ready to leave and something tragic happened or something brutal happened. And that's not because it happened just out of the whim. It's because these issues are brewing behind closed doors for many, many days and or months. So I will go back to the power and control wheel. And while, I was able to file a restraining order and leave, and, through the courts and, going through that process was daunting in itself. Many, as I said, many victims don't get that chance. And so I want to go back to the power and control wheel and sort of point out some of the things that I talked about during, what I experienced and what my mom experienced, using coercion and threats, using intimidation, even if that's not anything to do with physically intimidating someone. It can be a menacing look that they use throughout the relationship to let you know that they mean business, right? It can be gestures, maybe using their finger as a gun, maybe having a gun or a knife and just placing it on the table, that of the spaces that you both share. It does not have to be physical. Using emotional abuse, name calling, mind games. Oftentimes now it's called gaslighting, where they make you feel like you're crazy. That I didn't say that. You misremembered it, or that's not the way it happened, right? Putting someone down, making someone feel guilty, using isolation. So, gosh, this was such a big one for me because it became a point where the Lovern that I knew uh, disappeared over a period of, I'd say, 4 months, from where the relationship was happy-go-lucky, where I presented myself as someone that was, a very social person and a lot of friends, a lot of guy friends, a lot of girlfriends. That dwindled over the course of 4 months, towards the beginning of the relationship, because he did not like it. He did not, especially like me talking to other men, and he didn't have to say it oftentimes. It was just, well, who was that? Oh, well, how long have you known him? But why do you talk to him? I think he likes you in a different way. All of these, sort of the way that he placed the words, it made it seem like it was a bad thing. And you're in a new relationship. You absolutely want it to work. If things are going well, otherwise, you're not thinking lightning is going to strike twice. So you want this to work out, despite everything else. The red flags are coming at you left, right, and center, but you're not seeing them because you're not looking for them. You're just going about life thinking that you're trying to make something brand new work and or continue to work. Minimizing and denying blame, going back to the power and control wheel. One thing that abusers are really great at is never taking accountability, and always placing blame on someone else for what's happening. You made me do that. If you hadn't done this, I wouldn't have done this. You made this happen. Why don't you say, and always sort of passing the buck. Using children, if there are children involved, there's so many ways that abusers use children, in these relationships. So making them feel guilty about the children in general, whether the way you're parenting, your parenting skills, threatening to take the children away if there's courts involved, financial abuse power as far as children are concerned. I'm not going to pay for this because, you didn't do this, or as it relates to the kids. Using privilege and economic abuse, I splice together because that can be financial, that can be privilege in general. So we're going to move on again in the essence of time. How to spot signs of abusers. I did talk a little bit about that, but again, in the beginning of a relationship, it's really hard to sort of, put them together. And no one thing is indicative of somebody being abusive or potentially being abusive down the line. But if there are a lot of these things kind of spliced together, you do want to take notice, and you do want to make a note of it, and you do want to say whether or not this is something that you want to continue with. And even if you've been in the relationship for a very long time, and these are the things that you've become accustomed to, please understand that they are not normal. Okay, so acting jealous and or possessive, we talked about. Controlling a victim's whereabouts, so wanting to know where you are, who you're with, when you're going to be home, what time you're going to be home, isolating you, threatening to harm you or your loved ones, and that can include pets, forcing victims to have sex against their will or do other things against their will. That can be financial, forcing you to buy things, through financial means, that you don't want to do, opening up a credit card that you don't want to do, threatening to commit suicide if they leave. So again, making you feel guilty. That's was another big thing about for me, and why I stayed. It's because I kept hearing from him not necessarily because I was looking to leave, but each time that he did something, sometimes he would pawn it off on the idea of, well, I can't live without you. The idea of living without you it sends me crazy. I'd rather die. One time he called me from the train station, or said that he was at the train station, and said that he was going to throw himself on the train tracks, because I was upset and that he made me cry. And that was the last thing that he was looking to do. Okay. Has an unpredictable temper. So you don't know when they're going to blow up. All right. Things are great today, but then tomorrow, you have no idea. And I'd like to point this out because I know there are potentially moms on the call. It's not just, so this issue tends to repeat itself from very early on, especially if teenagers that live in the home have witnessed these behaviors from anyone. They go on to perpetuate those behaviors. Again, the legacy that was passed down by my father was something that I enacted on my own once I was, I thought I was grown enough or ready enough to be in a relationship. And so, teenagers are experiencing this at a very high rate. 1 in every 3 teens will experience the issue of abuse. And they are spending 8 hours a day with their peers, sometimes more. And if they're seeing behaviors from anybody in the home, this is the way that it shows up. And these are some of the things to look at if you have teens as well. So I'm not going to go through all of them because some are repetitive, but if they have a decreased interest in extracurricular activities, they don't want to go to grandma's house anymore, even though they love to do it before. Now that they're dating this person, now they don't want to participate. Unexplained marks or bruises is a huge one. Oh, I fell. Oh, Cicely grabbed my arm. Or that happened at practice, when that never happened before. If they've changed their appearance, that's to the bottom. And they're wearing, now makeup to cover up things, or they're wearing turtlenecks in the middle of the summer, or, their style of dress has become completely different from what please make a note of that. One of the resources that I love to point out is loversrespect.org. It's a teen dating violence website, and they really have great pointers to talk to teens about this issue. So I talked a little bit about the cycle of violence and how, sometimes when you're in these relationships, or you're starting out in a relationship where things are fantastic and it's great, and, you're hoping for the best, and it's the honeymoon phase. So, I've bought you flowers and we're dating, or, the first I'm sorry has come because they've done something, and they said, well, it won't happen again, and I can't wait to work this out, and I'm going to be the best person I can be because you deserve better. And it's all great, but then tension starts to build, and so their voice changes, or their tone changes, and they're anxious, or they're putting you down, or the verbal abuse is coming, and they're yelling, and all of this is happening, so you're feeling uneasy as to what their behavior is going to be. And then the acute explosion, which again does not always have to be physical. It can be a barrage of verbal abuse. It can be, again, using weapons and gestures, and just again the next level of what it was before during the tension building phase. And this is not a science. This is generally what happens, and I can again speak from experience, both from my father and my abuser. This is what it looked like. And so, PSA. So once you've decided to leave an abusive relationship, you're done. You've gotten to your breaking point, which is what I did after my last beating. I said, I can't do this anymore. I want to leave. I don't want to deal with it. Thankfully, I did not have any kids with this person. I was not married to this person. Oftentimes, even when these things have happened, the abuse continues, and it can happen in very many ways. And so I call it PSA, short for post-separation abuse. It's not the kind of PSA we like. And post-separation abuse is the relentless attempt by an abuser to maintain control and power over their victims after separation. It is often described by many survivors to be worse than the abuses they suffered while in the relationship, because you, as a survivor, you are trying to get your life positioned in a way that you begin the healing process, but you can't, because your abuser is in some way, shape, or form trying to maintain power and control. For me, it showed up in the form of him trying to break into my apartment to get the last word. Thankfully, that didn't happen. And then it showed up in stalking, where he was showing up, letting him know that I see you. I can get to you at any point, right? For others, it's through the children. It's through the courts. It's through finances. It's any way to maintain some level of power and control in these relationships. So what do you do? What do you do when this is happening? Well, if you are married and you're going through family court, oftentimes many people don't understand, even at that point, that this is abuse and that there are resources available to you to help you sort of understand the next step. And so legal advocacy resources are available, not just to Casa Marina, who oversees the statewide domestic violence hotline called SafeLink, or Dove out of Quincy, which also has a very broad um, legal advocacy department and set of resources. But many domestic violence agencies in the Commonwealth and beyond have legal advocacy departments. And what do? They help you file restraining orders. They help you understand what the next step is when after you file the restraining order. They accompany you to court in some instances, and just really get you ready, again, understanding what your rights are in many different areas. So I really like to point out those resources and again, have you understand that it's not just them, but there are many others. Those numbers are on the screen. I will be leaving them with Cynthia so that if anybody needs them, they can have them. Safety planning. So you've left or you're thinking about leaving and you're trying to leave and leave safely. Oftentimes that is not, it's not black and white on being able to leave. And so what do? How do you leave safely to make sure that, your abuser doesn't go into a spiral, track you down, and have something happen to you? Knowing abusers' red flags. I put that there because, again, this is something that was very integral for me. I knew sort of his behaviors and what his mood was going to be, that he was potentially going to explode in anger. Knowing what those were, if I had known to sort of, be able to get an excuse to leave the house, that could potentially save me. Again, not science, but potentially save me from a brutal attack, or give him time to calm down, even if I wasn't ready to leave the relationship in that moment. Coming up with code words that alerts family and friends, that if you're on the phone with them, or text them, that those code words means you need help. Being ready to leave at a moment's notice. So emergency cash, that might not always be the deal, but even clothes and important documents, copies of them stashed away at somebody else's house. Getting a second cell phone or a prepaid burner. Some domestic violence agencies have them. And then paying attention to technology, making sure that you use, what your plans are, and, communicating that through a work library computer, or community center. Domestic violence agencies. I talked a lot about them prior, and I want to get folks in the know about what they do. They generally house victims as well as mothers and their children, and some will take men, separate, part of the house. And contrary to belief, they're based out of big houses. They're not a big open room with beds, which is what I thought domestic violence shelters were prior. And so they are set at undisclosed locations, separate from the agencies that oversee them. They provide, like I said, legal help, support groups, employment programs, financial assistance, counseling for not just you and your children. And then the statewide domestic violence hotline that has a list of all the domestic violence shelters in the state of Massachusetts and beyond, is SafeLink. SafeLink is the numbers at the bottom of the screen, and they can point you in the right direction of where the domestic violence agency is in your area. Even though this is happening to you in Timbuktu, trust and believe there's help in Timbuktu, okay? How do you support someone that is looking to leave abuse or someone involved currently in a relationship? Oftentimes people think it is telling that person, just get up and leave. And it's not that black and white. Most times victims are in positions where they are bound, whether it be, and we'll go through just a couple of those reasons, but how you can be a support is by these processes. respecting their confidentiality, making sure that you do not discuss what's happening with them to them if they've disclosed to you with other family members. They have trusted to speak. Go ahead, Cynthia.
Oh, no, sorry, that was just something popping up on my computer. Keep going.
We are almost done. So believing the person at the core is something that you must be imperative on doing, is believing victims when they say that this is happening, acknowledging that this is something that has been done to them, okay? Respecting their right to make their own decisions, that even though you have presented them with the domestic violence agency in the area and what help can look like, that they are the experts on what is next for them. As much as you tell victims you need to leave, they can't and won't do that until it is right for them. Okay. So just making sure that you stay with them, help them to safety plan, as we talked about earlier, promoting community access to services. So again, figuring out what the domestic violence agency in your area and then pointing that out to them and becoming an upstander. We're going to skip these in the essence of time. And as much as we've talked about unhealthy relationships, it's important to know what healthy relationship traits look like. Often we think, I certainly thought I knew what a healthy relationship was. I'd watched enough TV and Hallmark Channel movies to know what it was, but I did not. At the core, if you're in a relationship, these are the things that circumvent what healthy relationships should or could look like. Honesty and responsibility, open communication. So I should be able to tell you that I'm going down to Martha's house, and you trust that I'll be at Martha's house and not, question and call me 10 times while I'm there, or question me when I get back as to why I was there for that length of time. Intimacy. So if someone is holding back intimacy and physical affection as a way to punish you, that's not healthy. Fairness and negotiation and shared responsibility. I group these together because you should always have a seat at the table. And be able to voice your opinion and your views, whether it be over children, finances, the house, or wherever you're living together. Respect at the core. My gosh, we should be able to argue and agree to disagree. And that's okay. That's okay that we don't agree on certain things, but I should not be called out my name. I should not be, belittled and verbally abused at the core. So self-care checklist, almost, this is saying we're at the end because this is really big for me on a day-to-day basis. No matter if you're in a relationship, but especially when you're in a relationship, that you allow yourself to do these things, or at least some of these things, to make sure that you're okay on a daily basis. So it's okay to cry. It's okay to be sad. Oftentimes they say that, women are strong and you got to be strong. And that's, oh my gosh, we are allowed to feel, and a good cry ain't never hurt nobody. Okay. So allowing yourself to cry is goodness and therapy for the soul. Spending time alone. So really getting to know yourself. What do you like to do? What makes you happy? What makes you tick? Here are some examples, going out and on dating yourself, taking yourself to a movie, meditation, relaxing or giving back, volunteering in your community, writing in a journal. Really, even if at the beginning of the relationship, you're able to journal what that looked like. And over time, sometimes it's because writings in a book sort of speaks to you. So the relationship started here. And when you read that portion, it's like, oh my gosh, everything was flowery and happy and go lucky. And then somewhere along the middle, it became dark and, sinister. And, sometimes that really helps. And then just getting your thoughts out on paper sometimes helps. Getting enough sleep, praying, that's a favorite of mine, and or therapy, another favorite of mine, making time away from your phone, positive affirmations, and staying in contact with the people that are important to you. So again, even if you're in a relationship, it is important to keep relationships alive, especially the ones that mean a lot to you, so that you don't become isolated no matter what. That is the end. This is a resource that talks about who we are and where you can find us. You can call or text us at 556-9876. And that is my book. I don't know how that popped up because I didn't press next. But that is the book. That's my DV memoir that I'm on a nationwide book tour with, that sort of really goes into my story and what it looked like to leave. And again, not just survive, but thrive now. The image was really important because I wanted to show folks, well, the publisher really wanted to show folks what we look like on a daily basis, how we have to present in the world as everything okay, but we're walking around with scars underneath. Everybody has stuff. It does not have to be physical scars, as you see in the picture. Underneath, we are all carrying things that are troubling to us, and it's important for us to voice them. Once we speak up, this issue breeds in silence, and it's important for us to share with others about what we're experiencing, so that you could understand, A, you're not alone, and B, there is help. That's my time, and we are right at the 1 o'clock hour, so I'll turn it back to you, Cynthia.
So Lovern, the only thing I can say that I'm sorry about is that we didn't schedule more time for this. Your story
Oh,
is unbelievable, and what you have been through, what you've accomplished, you are just so amazing. And I just want to thank
really
you so
humbling.
much for
I
the.
appreciate you. I appreciate you so very much. Um, and so do we have any questions?
Well, I do have a couple questions for you. And I know we're a little bit over, but I think they're important. Can you talk about how Love Life Now like supports children involved in these situations?
Yeah, good question. And so while we do not offer direct assistance in the form of counseling, domestic violence agencies throughout the state do offer one-on-one counseling for children. Again, so domestic violence counseling is something that, oftentimes people don't understand. First of all, it's free. If you reach out, and second of all, that it's geared towards domestic violence specifically. There are many folks that say that they, practice, family counseling and, relationships, but not DV specific. And so there are trained counselors at these domestic violence agencies that are trained to go one-on-one to support children with child witnesses to domestic violence. There's also a project out of the Boston Medical Center called the Child Witness to Violence Project, and they also offer support there as well. So I do want to point that out as well.
But I'm just noticing the time. I know Lovern has other engagements, and I want to thank her so much for just the information that she's provided today. It's just been invaluable. And with that, we're going to wrap up another one of our quarterly Zoom programs. And it was so nice to see you all virtually. And have a great day. Thank you, Lovern.
Thank you, Cindy. Good to talk to you all.
Bye.